Welcome to Creating Value Wins. I'm Steve Denning, along with our co-hosts, Doug Kirkpatrick, Hunter Hastings, and Hugo Lorenzo. And today we have two wonderful guests, Jana Werner and Le-Brun, who are the authors of an exciting new book, The Octopus Organization. So welcome, Phil and Jana. And the overall theme of this podcast, as you know, is to explore the paradigm shift from obsolete management thinking to genuine value creation for customers in particular, but also workers and society. And we summarize this with our three-word mantra, creating value wins. And by value, we mean principally value for customers. But now in our breaking news segment, which we do regularly, there is a suggestion in the latest issue of Harvard Business Review that we have it backwards, that in fact, true value is value for shareholders, and value should in fact mean the opposite of what we are saying. Yes, it's almost unbelievable to me, but true. The latest issue, Harvard Business Review, proposes to resuscitate what Jack Welch called in 2009 the world's dumbest idea. The dumbest idea in the world could hardly be clearer than that. The idea that the purpose of a firm, the only purpose of a firm, is to maximize shareholder value. That if you do that, you maximize shareholder value, everything else will fall into place. And that is the idea promised and put forward again in this article. That idea has dominated management for the last 50 years and did so seemingly until August 2019, when several hundred major business leaders got together and said, in response to an enormous political outcry, that is wrong. We do not believe that. We, in fact, believe creating value for all the stakeholders. And so we will do that in future. Crystal clear in their declaration. There was only one thing wrong. Nothing happened. The firms that had been maximizing shareholder value continued to maximize shareholder value, and those that had a different goal of creating value, particularly for customers, kept on doing that. And this was checked by a team in Harvard Law School, actually, Lucian and Bebchek. They produced a wonderfully comprehensive review confirming that that is the case, that none of the firms that were maximizing shareholder value before the declaration had changed anything, not their goal, not their processes, not their practices. The whole organization stayed the same, but they did it undercover. They didn't talk about maximizing shareholder value anymore. In fact, they talked about the customer, they talked about the wonderful workers, they talked about everything except what they were really trying to do, namely maximize shareholder value. And so it's rather strange when we come to this situation now, when Harvard Business Review puts out an article which basically says we were wrong in Roundtable Declaration in 2019. We were right for those last 50 years, and we should get back to the 20th century and get back to maximizing shareholder value. And this is almost unbelievable to me, having been in the fight to get maximizing shareholder value out of the bloodstream of organizations, and to see it now coming back in from the world's leading management journal is really quite a shock. What do you think, Doug? Are you happy to see going back to the 20th century?
That's kind of depressing, actually. Let's think about customers for a change. In this article, the customers are just an abstract constraint. They're not the raison d'etre of business existence in the first place. Actually, delighting customers as human beings doesn't even enter the picture. Customers are just a bunch of numbers, and as long as the numbers are okay, that's just fine. We can get on with the real task of extracting value for shareholders and executives. So customers are actually thought of as hard constraints in the form of measurable absolutes, like no decline in customer net promoter scores. So in other words, don't worry about delighting customers, just make sure that the score doesn't drop. Well, this is classic Tin Man thinking. It reduces human beings both customers and employees to variables in a financial organization model. And we've already seen where that leads.
I think that's the key point for me as well. If customers are treated as constraints, that means the organization is no longer asking, how do we create more value? It's asking, how little customer dissatisfaction can we tolerate while we're still optimizing for something else? So that changed the behavior. People stop looking for customer value and start managing customer scores. And when a measure becomes a defensive target, which we have seen most of the companies, teams learn to protect the metrics instead of improving the experience. So from a human factors perspective, that matters. Once the customer becomes an abstract variable in a financial optimization model, and I think Hunter will have a lot to say about this, we stop seeing the human reality, the needs, the friction, the trust, the anxiety, the effort, and the context. So while in the spreadsheet everything makes look clean, the experience may not.
I mean, there's so much wrong with this maximizing shareholder value, but let me focus on my pet peeve, which is getting the word value wrong. And they get it wrong in two ways. One, as we keep emphasizing, value is subjective. It can't be measured. It can't be quantified. It's a feeling in the customer's mind. They can perhaps rank it. I prefer this to that. There's more value here and less value there, but it's not a quantifiable item. And then second, it's not about shareholder value, it's about customer value, as Steve said. And we must focus all of firms' activities on customers, creating value, and everything else is a consequence. Profit is a consequence. That's the customer signaling that they approve of what you're supplying. And shareholder value is a like third or fourth residual of that when you start to dole out the bonuses to them. So I'm just going to focus on the misuse of the word value, and that's my pet peeve.
Yeah, what it seems that the authors are consultants for Bain, that they want the finance people to be running the firm, basically planning long-term money flows over the next 10 years and then telling everyone in a hierarchical manner, this is what you have to do. Here is your share. Go ahead and deliver it and make sure that the net promoter scores are up to snuff, but don't tell us what's actually going on. Just deliver the numbers. And that is the new corporation as proposed by Bain. What is staggering to me is the two examples that they chose to illustrate this, Costco and BP, British Petroleum, as examples of firms that are doing this right, that are maximizing shareholder value. Well, it's true that Costco is doing brilliantly on shareholder value, but it's not because they're focused on shareholder value. It's because they, above all, and among all the companies, one of the most sensitive and assiduous in focusing on value for customers and the employees. And they deliver enormous value for shareholders, way above the S&P average because of that. It's a result, not the goal. BP, of course, is the exact opposite. They are totally focused on shareholder value. And of course, as a result, they are performing way below average, only half of what the S&P does in terms of 10-year total return. So the two examples, I mean, you would think they would at least pick examples that fitted the theory. The examples show the exact opposite.
So I just want to jump in there because I'm passionate about Costco. Costco was formed here in San Diego, where I live, by a guy called Sol Price. It started out as Price Club. And club's an interesting term. It means shared interests, shared values. And the club members pay a membership fee, and Price Club was focused on its members, i.e. customer obsession, as Jeff Bezos would call it, customer sovereignty, as I call it. And they're constantly focused on this membership model. And that supplies a lot of cash flow because the members pay. So you've got to keep giving them value, constantly looking for new categories in which members can get the best value, get the best price for the highest quality goods. They merged Price Club with Costco, so it became Price Costco, then Costco. But it's always been a member club. And that's a great analogy that your friends at Harvard Business Review missed.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. And I mean, the alternative was so simple and powerful. Make creating genuine value for customers the primary goal of the organization. And what's happening in this AI era, it's having even more impact that customers become essential part of getting real value from AI. But Hugo, are you surprised by any of this? I know you have a sharp eye on what's really going on in business.
Steve, these consultants are in for the money and for the money themselves, right? They can once again make a bundle showing firms how to appear to satisfying customers, while that all the time they are cashing in the chips for themselves. And we have seen this for many, many times. Sometimes I think people can drift into self-protective or extractive behavior when the conditions push them there. So I would think, what are the goals, incentives, decisions rights, information flows, pressures that make one direction or orientation more likely than the other? And I think that would be very relevant for the topic as well, before we even consider the change they are trying to come and these shareholder values they are bringing, which for me, it's quite concerning, the way they are trying to do this.
Well, let's ask Jana. You said you had a point of view here, Jana. What do you think about this topic?
Yeah, I'm quite lucky to work for a company that literally says in its purpose mission statement to be the most customer-centric company on earth. So I have the pleasure now for almost 6 years to live this culture and see if it's just a slogan or if it's truly lived. And I can see every day how it's lived. And I find this point of view expressed in the article probably challenging and risky because it limits people's curiosity, people's motivation, and people's desire to truly understand customer needs and innovate for them. So truly caring. And I think sooner or later over time, the results, the way you innovate for customers, people will notice, customers notice if you care about them and if you're curious about them or not. And that will, in the end, over time, result in a shareholder value impact. I love this quote from Jeff Bezos. He says, the reason we are the most customer-centric company on earth is because customers are always wonderfully dissatisfied. And that means you can always innovate on their behalf. It creates a satisfaction for the people working in the organization as well. I don't know many people who want to be the wheels in the machinery or cogs in a company that focuses on shareholder. It's not very inspirational or motivational. Whereas if you get to innovate for customers and the result, a side result is shareholder value, it's much more satisfactory for a human to do something where you feel you solve true problems for customers. So I'd much rather work in a company like that. And I think talent is drawn to an organization like that. And the last bit I want to add is I don't know where I read it. It was either Sahil Bloom or Shane Parrish. And he said, if you're trying to outperform someone who loves truly doing something and you just try to outperform them, you never will, because that person will have so much more nuance and thought at night when they go to bed. They will read and study. You'll never outperform them on the surface. And I think that's the same here. If you just go after shareholder value, you'll never outperform a company that truly cares.
You identify 36 anti-patterns across clarity, ownership, and curiosity.
Yes.
And I like to connect that directly to value creation, because that's what the podcast is about, of course. But in your work, which anti-pattern most often reveals that an organization says it wants customer value, but has actually designed conditions that reward control, self-protection, or internal optimization? And can you walk us through a real case where a leader or team broke that pattern, not by changing the slogan, but by changing the conditions of the work?
There are many anti-patterns that actually take us away from value. Most of what we call Tin Man organizations like the Wizard of Oz, this creaky, mechanical, rusting character, most of the organizations that still operate like that, in a bit in a factory mindset, they look inwards and they look at proxies. They look at proxy metrics internally. Like if you've created a PowerPoint or followed a process, you're done. You haven't done anything for your customers, but you fulfilled some internal metric. Or how many spans of control? What's the spans of control of a leader? There are many of these anti-patterns that we see that stand in the way of truly delivering customer value. And the organizations that do this well start orientating outwards. They look at what data do I collect? Do I collect the data for vanity metrics or to really learn about how my customers operate, how I operate, what I'm learning, how quickly I'm learning? So it's turning these things from looking inward to looking outward. And that takes a while, and that is a journey that these Tin Man organizations need to go through, because it's much safer and easier to measure what you do internally than what you do outwards.
Yeah, so one of the elements that really intrigued us, Phil, in your wonderful book is your linkage of curiosity as an attribute of a firm and experimentation as the way of learning. And we're enthusiastic about that because we see entrepreneurship and innovation as an action orientation, doing something, experimenting, learning from that and recycling that learning as new innovation. But it creates a big possibility space where you could be wrong. And so some experiments are going to, quote, fail, unquote. We hate that word, but that's often the one that's used. So that was something we'd like to hear you develop, the idea of curiosity and experimentation as a way of operating a business as opposed to planning and strategy and budgets and control.
I think in the days where we were producing a known, simple, mechanical thing, like a car, for instance, you followed a set of processes and you could measure each part of the process, and all of those bits of the process led to a car. It's complicated. You can learn how to do it. You can read a manual. What we're facing today is a much more complex world where there are more questions than answers. And we prefer to think of learning fast rather than failing, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. It's not about failing fast. It's about, I don't have all of the answers. In a world of AI, most organizations are still trying to figure out, how do I use it? How do I deliver more value to the customers? How do I use it for internal efficiencies? What should my structure look like? None of these have simple textbook answers. They are complex issues. And the only way to figure out an answer that's right for your organization is continuous experimentation. And to do that, what we face in many organizations is still this Tin Man model, this idea that leadership know the answer because the answer has been stable for many years. And all of these questions go up the hierarchy to a governance meeting, another governance meeting, an executive governance meeting. Everyone weighs in. And what we're actually doing is increasing the risk of failure. And not only are we increasing the risk of failure because all of these opinions are coming to the table without actually getting into action, as you say, but we're slowing down the rate at which we learn. So the very mechanisms we're using to try and protect our organizations are creating more risk in organizations. So these big projects we launch don't allow us to learn. They're all date-driven. And inevitably, unfortunately, they fail. So our belief is this idea of distributing decision-making, pushing decisions as close to the customer as possible. Often that means breaking down decisions, making them smaller, making the blast radius smaller. But the teams closest to the customers are the ones that can quickly iterate with the customer, figure out what works, what doesn't work. If it doesn't work, we can learn and move on. If it does work, then we can build on that. Unfortunately, many organizations invest in what we call innovation theater. They build the shiny glass and steel building somewhere well away from the headquarters and certainly well away from the customers. And they come up with great ideas, but they don't actually engage the customers in a way that's meaningful. And it makes innovation someone else's job, not the average employee. So they switch off. Why be curious if you're not going to be asked your opinion?
I love that term, innovation theater. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question I think I'll pose to both Phil and Jana, and thanks for being here. Because the octopus is an invertebrate, it lacks a rigid skeletal framework, and it relies on shared intent to keep all of its limbs coordinated. And some octopuses can actually walk, we know that. Can you think of a company that grew so fast that shared intent was no longer enough to sustain coordination, where the coordination actually began to break down and disintegrate, and perhaps where leadership realized they had to create some kind of temporary skeleton or scaffolding just to survive scaling?
I'll take a personal example. I worked for McDonald's Corporation for over 30 years in various roles, including as their international CIO. So I got this privileged position of being able to see what was happening across ultimately 120 different countries when I was there. And it went through what many organizations go through. You over-centralize because you believe that's going to generate efficiencies, but the reality is you create this giant bottleneck for decision-making, and you start to believe that everyone's the same, but customers in Japan are not the same as customers in the US. And then there's an overreaction where you over decentralize, where you lose the ability to share good ideas. A good idea in the UK may be something you could scale in Brazil or Australia. And we went to such a point of decentralization. It was almost in the heritage, this idea of owner-operators, franchisees running their own business permeated the organization so deeply that it became a case of everyone thought they were king or queen of their domain. And the problem that led to was we were seeing these problems pop up, which affected multiple countries or business units. We were seeing some great innovations coming out of all sorts of countries, Guatemala, Singapore, Japan, the US. But we couldn't actually use them in any other country because everyone had gone off and developed their own business processes, their own technology. So this idea that we could innovate anywhere and use it everywhere didn't work. And part of that is we'd lost our shared intent. We'd lost our shared vision of what did McDonald's stand for? What was at the core of the organization? And the way we solved it, or started to solve it, was we created virtual organizations. We sort of cut through this idea of the country and the center, headquarters and the business unit, or IT and the business, and all of this jargon that gets in the way and creates these virtual silos. So we created these virtual organizations, pulled people in from the business units, from the corporate center, and we came up with a shared intent. And it was a little shared intent initially. Let's develop something which we can all use and build trust with each other. Then we built a bit more, then a bit more, then a bit more. And before we knew it, we were in a situation where my team had the opportunity to build a common foundation for one of the largest companies in the world. And that then became an accelerator for innovation anywhere around the world to everywhere around the world.
Amazing. So basically, autonomy without coordination becomes noise. So in human factors, we don't just look at the individual competence. We look at the shared intent, feedback loops, speak up behavior, decision rights, and trust in local judgment. And for me, that's the nervous system of the Octopus Organization. And what you're describing is really what we consider that enabler for the value creation.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that list, Hugo, is shared values or principles. The organizations that do this well, they hire and promote and evaluate and support people against a shared set of values. And when people share that set of values, you can let them run. You don't need to restrict them with policies and processes and oversight because they share the values that you share in the organization, and so you can let them operate much more freely. That's something I haven't appreciated until I joined Amazon.
But Jana, you see, if people hide bad news, if they escalate their decision, if they flatter the power, avoid difficult conversations, or wait for permission, I wouldn't start by asking what is wrong with these people. I would ask what makes this behavior make sense here. So why organizations keeps that? Why they keep protecting that?
I don't know if organizations protect that. I guess in some companies, the culture is that there's no upside to sharing diverse point of views, sharing work in progress. There's no upside questioning your boss or your peers. The organizations that do this well create a space where there's at least no downside, ideally an upside for people that focus on value. Many organizations expect leaders to have the answers. They fall into echo chambers, into confirmation bias. There's low psychological safety. There's low curiosity to ask for dissenting voices. Most companies like to present finished PowerPoints instead of looking at true work in progress to get to the real meaty, difficult problems, because that can feel uncomfortable to leaders who are, to the earlier point in this conversation, expected to deliver constant positive shareholder returns. And this messy bit of learning, of failing, of having honest conversations on the surface stands in the way of that. We in this group here, in this conversation, all know that that is where the real value happens. This creative abrasion, this honest conversation, this is where you suddenly create unexpected new things, innovation, exciting new problem solving. But that's not the story we learn as leaders in traditional organizations. And the structures that have been built make it scary to do this. Certainly, if you're the only one who acts like that, then you just don't fit in. And it has, what I learned in the English language, career limiting consequences.
So you're building on all of this, Phil. There's a term you use in your book, which is continuous transformation, the outcome of this experimentation and curiosity and adaptiveness. Transformation is a really scary word, I find, and people don't want to be transformed. And continuous transformation, therefore, sounds extra scary. So you use the term. Is it a positive term? Is it a negative term? How do I deal with continuous transformation?
I think we'll probably tag team on this because there's quite a nuanced issue. The problem with the word transformation, to your point, is it does feel scary because that's exactly how it's been implemented in organizations today. We've run the business. Now we've actually fallen behind in terms of our responsiveness, our cost effectiveness, our ability to actually understand what the customer wants. So what's the solution to that? We're going to have a transformation. And a transformation often takes the form of a 12, 18-month or 5-year project, multi-million dollars, bring in lots of external people. Everyone's transformed, then we'll get back to our normal work. So transformations as they stand today is really taking an old organization, applying old methodology and hoping something amazing will appear from that. And in fact, what we find continuously is we all know the stats. 70 to 90% of transformations fail to see the outcomes that were anticipated. But from a human point of view, they're soul destroying. From a practical point of view, as soon as you stop moving forward, as soon as you stop transforming, as soon as you declare you are now an adaptive, agile organization, you start to go backwards. Jana?
I think that this whole idea of continuous transformation is uncomfortable. I think teams always need certain anchors and they shouldn't go away even when you adapt and move forward and change. So things like your organization's purpose, your values, your long-lived customer needs. At Amazon, we say nobody ever wants to pay more, have slower delivery, or less choice. That will be the case today and in 10 years. How you solve for that will change, but you'll have long-lived customer needs. So I get asked by CXOs, how do we deal with this constant change? I can't constantly change and update, but actually you have long-lived things that stay and that you can anchor on. And then on top of that, if you can understand why you work for the company and that stays a constant positive thing, then the continuous advancing can actually be exciting because it's a company that doesn't feel stagnant, but where you positively can see you can jump to different roles to evolve your career. You're allowed and actually encouraged to try something new, to test new technology, to solve problems differently. And then this can actually be an upside. So instead of doing this transforming change to people, you can turn it into a pull to say the world keeps evolving and it's your opportunity within the stable setting that we have to keep inventing and reinventing and try different parts of the organization. And that's actually enjoyable. I've worked in many companies that did transform, but they were so rigid you could never actually get anything done, or for your personal career advancement, jump roles or try something new.
Well, thank you. You've transformed transformation for me. I get it.
We don't use the T word. We don't use the T word anymore. We like this idea of continuously adapting and making it not a scary thing, but an opportunity. We're trying to be eternal optimists.
I believe that the most difficult in continuous transformation is the continuous part. That's what people really disencourage, because it never ends, and they keep believing that the transformation will stop one of these days because they transform that as a project as well. And I think that's the difficulty, is the continuous work.
100%. And I am trying to work with companies to make it not a scary thing, but make people see it as an opportunity. Because when people are scared, they'll freeze, they're not going to be curious, they're probably going to fight against it. So how can you create it and turn it into something where people actually get excited and enjoy and are safe and comfortable trying new things?
Yeah, sometimes people are not resisting the change. They are just resisting the ambiguity without support. And calling that agility doesn't make it healthier.
Exactly. It being done to you. Who wants something rolled out onto them? It sounds horrible. So stay away from those things.
Right. Well, coming back to our friend the octopus, and I like the tag team approach on that last question. The octopus is such a wonderful metaphor because it's about distributing intelligence and rapid adaptation and regeneration. But octopi are also notoriously solitary and somewhat short-lived. So, what gives you hope that octopus organizations will achieve some sustainable longevity and continue to adapt and thrive over years and years?
The octopus has done pretty well. It's survived in its current form, biological form, for about 250 million years. So yes, there's been generation after generation, just like there are with businesses. And yeah, here's a useless fact for you. There are actually colonies of octopuses around the world, particularly off the coast of Australia, and they collaborate with fish to go hunting. So
they punch the fish in the gut if the fish makes a mistake. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And humans are short-lived compared to elephants. So his no metaphor is perfect. The octopuses are short-lived, but they learn really quickly about the environment around them. They don't grow up with parents. They don't have a hard shell. They rely on their adaptability for their resilience and their ability to adapt in the environment that they're in. What we found with companies, though, as we look at them, is if you look back to the genesis of where companies came from, often companies were temporary structures designed to achieve a mission. And once the mission was achieved, they disappeared. This is going back hundreds of years. Now, companies are so vested in their own survival, they often look in at themselves rather than at their mission and at what customers want. They're not looking at the environment. They're looking at these proxy measures. We actually see this with the application of artificial intelligence today. In many of the larger companies, they're talking about how do I use AI to drive efficiencies, do more with less people. You look at startups, they take a very different view. Their view is quite simply, how do I use AI to deliver more value and be laser focused on what the customers actually want? So the metaphor isn't perfect, but the other thing I'd say with the octopus too is there is never going to be an octopus organization. That may sound a bit controversial given that we wrote a book called The Octopus Organization. But I think this idea that you reach this nirvana state where you're this being, this organization that is at CMM level 5 or whatever your maturity measure is exactly the antithesis of what we're fighting with this idea of continuous improvement. So things like clarity are really important in organizations. So leadership setting this tone from top down about what is important to us. What are the small number of priorities we should be going after, rather than looking at some of the proxy measures we often fall in love with in organizations. And as you say, there are human realities. Us humans are fickle beings. We change humans in organizations all the time. This idea that we can develop a psychologically safe environment, which is important for innovation, and say, we're done, we're psychologically safe, is just simply not how it works. So this is always going to require us humans, us leaders, to reassess the environment we're operating in, the people we bring in, how they're doing as a team, and making sure we're continually adjusting the environment to ensure those people are successful and the organization actually thrives, because it's focused on value, not just on its own survival.
The final question is one about success. You've actually written a wonderful book, and I've written about it in Forbes article and told people how wonderful it is, and I understand it's selling very well, and I keep running across articles about it and people having conferences about it, and so that's exciting. But I'm just worried about the success I've seen of some other ideas. Is that obviously the 36 anti-patterns are very appropriate for dealing with problems in an organization where the problems are at the operational level. Teams are malfunctioning, and those 36 anti-patterns are a useful guide to have by your side when you're dealing with those issues. By many organizations, in fact, our recent articles suggest maybe 70% of organizations, they have problems not just at the operational level, but at the top of the organization and everything in between. And so one of the risks that I've seen in other great successes is that when the organization, like BP, for instance, which has a massive problem on every front, low returns for shareholders, and disgruntled employees, they've just fired their CEO, they have so many problems. They might be tempted to say, "Oh, let's bring in the Octopus duo. They will help us solve our problems." And of course, their problems go way beyond the 36 anti-patterns that you talked about. They're talking about just a fundamental rethinking of the entire organization. But they may be using the Octopus Organization as a front for not solving the real problems, which start with themselves in the C-suite and the board. I'm wondering whether you've started to see some of this when you're brought in by an organization, and you immediately see that the real problems in this organization are not just at the team level, but much deeper and at the higher level of the organization. Now, how do you respond to those challenges?
We absolutely see that. And we see there's this British saying I learned. I worked in the UK, and it says, I think it's something like, the fish stinks from the head. So I found that quite another interesting metaphor in the octopus world. And we write about the shadow of leaders. And when we come in and support organizations, and we work with the executive team, within 5 minutes, we can sense if they're truly curious, if they truly want to change, if they want to hear and ask questions, or if we're just there because someone asked them to listen to us for 5 minutes. You see very quickly if a team is curious and want to do something or not by how they ask, how they engage, and how they genuinely engage with us. Many of the anti-patterns work at different levels of the organizations that we write about. There's an anti-pattern about jargon and corporatees that works for everybody in the organization. We also look at things like, are you a team of leaders or a leadership team? So when we work with executive teams, do they all actually understand and have a joint point of view? We ask leadership teams, and they give us as many answers what their strategy is as there are people in the room. So then, of course, they are not aligned. We have seen leaders that not just have misaligned incentives, but actually even competing incentives at the executive level. So of course, things aren't going to work there. We have seen leadership teams that are focused very much on protecting their silos and not supporting each other and the organization. We have seen strategies that are so abstract that the organization can't do anything with them. Like they want to be like Tina Turner, simply the best at everything, their people, the environment, the operations, etc. And every strategy sounds the same. We have leaders that have given so many priorities because they can't say no. They don't have the courage or the leadership to say no, that they're killing their organization with priorities and context switching. So we do also work with leadership teams to start addressing some of these things. And a lot of these conversations are surprisingly personal. I've worked personally with a CEO that didn't understand that her team was nowhere near aligned with what she was thinking. I worked with a COO who said, my people don't want ownership, and it took a coaching conversation for her to realize that there was no upside for her people taking ownership because the culture was so punitive. So we work on the personal level to get mindsets shifted. We work on a team level to see how do you align, how do you get to joint outcomes, to customer focus. And then we help work on the mechanisms. What's a good strategy? How do you cut down your goals? How do you bring people together across silos? How do you not just do a crazy reorg? How is your go-to tool not always a reorg or a new PowerPoint? And you're absolutely right. And I think you can make a lot of impact at this top level, then at the frozen middle, and lighting 1,000 fires through the organizations that they can continuously fix and work on their anti-patterns.
And then you say, and then you'll die, basically.
Yeah, maybe. But then at least you die happy. At least you die happy.
You know the saying, right? Customer comes first, but only finance approves it. So,
And finally, we have a surprise for our guests. They may have seen in previous podcasts, but we always have a segment to end, which is introduced by a video. It's about invitation to them to tell us what is the world's dumbest management idea. And that plays. And then, so Jana and Phil, we didn't warn you about this, but we spring it on all our guests to tell what is the dumbest idea. We've kind of given you a hint. You have an easy option, that reviving the world's dumbest idea, as identified by Jack Welch, maximizing shareholder value. That is hard to beat, but maybe you have an idea that aggravates you even more, that frustrates you. And what has surprised us, each time the speakers come up with an unusual kind of cruelty that really obsesses them, and they're happy to have a chance to finally reveal what really bugs them about the working world. Jana, Phil?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, there's such a long list to choose from. I guess the one that springs to mind for me, given that so much of what we do is all about the people in the organization, is the organizations who say we don't have enough people and our people don't want to learn. Given that, training budgets have been flat for about 10 years now, most people do actually want to learn. And if you look at what the average person does in an organization, about 80% of it is waiting on other people or waiting for approvals or whatever. So this idea that we need more people and we have to bring talent in externally for everything we do just drives me nuts.
I have several that really annoy me. One is the idea of best practices, because then as soon as you have best practices, surely there can never be better practices. So we're kind of done here. And the other one is the idea that every time I have a problem, some consultancy turns up and gives me a prime number step of frameworks on a slide how to fix it. It's always 3, 5, or 7 steps that usually make a nice acronym, and then everything's better.
Any other contenders for the dumbest idea from our co-hosts? They've also had previous opportunities to give their contenders. But any final thoughts on the discussion?
I'm sticking with the misuse of the word value, Steve. It's really, really important to understand what value is. It's subjective. Don't quantify it. Don't give it to shareholders. Focus on customers. So I will continue to make that rant.
Nice.
And I'm also struck by the question of language is so fundamental to solving all these problems. We talked about transformation. And there are so many other words that once you use that word, you are already in a ton of trouble. And so one of the objects of our podcast will be to identify a glossary of terms that do not create a ton of trouble. And if you stick to these terms, you'll be able to have sensible, intelligent, moving, and effective conversations. So that's our show for today. And thank you very much to Jana and Phil for joining us, and particularly Phil, who squeezed us into his busy travel schedule, and to my co-hosts, as usual, great contribution. And so we will be having, obviously, weekly podcasts. And next week, we'll be having a very interesting guest, Stephen Forte, who was one of the few people who have both been a entrepreneur and really a highly effective entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, where he is actually funding many organizations. And he's also worked quite a bit in the Vatican, and not with the current Pope, but in the previous Pope. And so he knows the Vatican and how they were interacting with Silicon Valley long before Pope Leo sprung the new encyclical. And so we'll be able to get his view of both on what's going on in Silicon Valley, which of course is great interest to everyone, and how that relates to what's going on and what could go on in the Vatican. And so that's next segment. We'll be on that. But if you also want more, you can go back and see the previous 8 segments of the podcast and learn from all of the wonderful speakers that we've had. And we look forward to actually having interactions with you, having sessions where it's possible for you, the listeners, to interact with us, ask questions, and get answers on the spot. And so we'll be introducing that over the coming weeks. So thanks very much, and have a nice day and week, and create value and win.